Hello and welcome to the podcast Unclassed with your host Andrew Vigil. Um, Today I want to talk about teacher burnout. Um, I received some statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, um, and I just want to run a few statistics by you just so you can kind of understand um, what schools are facing. Um, More than 300,000 teachers quit their jobs in the middle of the year in 2022, leaving schools scrambling to fill vacancies. This directly impacts student achievement. There are now 567,000 fewer teachers than there were before the pandemic. This directly impacts student achievement. 74% of teachers have had to take on additional work because of staffing shortages, often without compensation. There have been 386 school shootings since Columbine. 356,000 students have experienced gun violence at school. Again, this directly impacts teachers and student achievement. The burnout rate for teachers is 14% higher than other industries, including healthcare and the military. 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. But the professionals most in crisis are those mid-career. Nearly 60% of teachers with 6 to 20 years of experience plan to leave the profession soon. And, the list, there's other statistics besides those, but those are to me the most pertinent statistics that really affect the teaching profession. Um, the job has changed. The job has changed drastically from when I started teaching in the early 2000s, and even before the pandemic. I will save more of the pandemic for a different episode. I don't want to get too much into that. But I just want to share some statistics with those of you that may not be aware of uh, what the school culture is like in a lot of schools. And some schools have they're affected more than other schools, um, but to some degree, all the schools all across this country and probably globe are affected by a lot of those things that I had mentioned. Um, Again, um, ever since the pandemic, usually at least a couple times a year, I question whether this profession is still for me. Um, the burnout is real. There's just so much that happens on a day to day basis that's unforeseen. Um, a lot of things, a lot of variables that are not planned for, um, and they fall right in your lap and kind of blindsides you right in the middle of the day. That kind of derails um, what's going on in the classroom, what's going on in the school, and even what's going on in the school district. Um, the number of teachers leaving the profession um, is growing by the year as the students are getting more and more difficult to teach. Um, and so um, I wanted to address what's what's kind of happening in my classroom and the other teachers' classrooms at my school, to my colleagues who teach all over the school district where I teach at. We all kind of sing the same tune. Um, we're kind of all seeing the same things. Again, some to a greater extent than others, but it's all kind of prevalent in the day to day of our educational profession. And so there is student apathy that really makes teaching hard. Um, there's a lack of engagement. Um, it's harder and harder to motivate today's students to want to learn, to want to study outside of class. Um, the intrinsic motivation for a lot of the kids is not there. Um, again, it's gotten worse since COVID. And I would have, all throughout my career, I've had between 25 and 30 students a class period. Again, I teach high school English, and I would get a handful of kids not really engaged, not really wanting to participate or be in class before the pandemic, and ever since they were uh, holed up at home for a year and a half, the script the script is flipped, and now I'll quite honestly have about a handful of kids that actually want to learn and put the work in. Um, the attendance rate, I'll about a third are usually missing, and another handful show up late. Um, and most of them are glued to their cell phones, their screens, and that's another topic um, I'll talk about in another show is the cell phone usage. But I kind of just want to hone in on just the student apathy. Um, it's just really hard to motivate a lot of the kids these days. I teach in a rougher area. Um, the demographic where I teach, secondary education, I don't want to say it's not a priority, but there's there's less educated family members where I teach. It's a harder part of town, and so a lot of the students, they are first time high school graduates, so um, they are missing that role model, that example, um, on what college looks like, what can be achieved. Of course, not all students, but a lot of them. Um, so it's really hard to want to stay in the profession when students don't want to be there, or um, they're there for reasons that are not academic. Um, and so, how do we motivate students that don't want to be there? They don't want to learn. They don't see the significance of what we are doing. Um, that whole adage of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Um, a lot of us teachers that were really trying to shove water down their throats, but they're not wanting to take the water. So that is a really big reason why teachers are starting to hang it up, is because um, you can't make a student want to learn, and show up to want to learn. Um, so that's one of the key things that the statistics I shared with you. Um, the amount of paperwork that goes into teaching now um, has compounded considerably. Again, when I started in the early 2000s, there were a couple observations a year. It was on a 3-ply form. Um, an administrator came in, observed, and it was a real quick process. And over the years, it's become hours and hours of prep work and uploading to justify what you're doing in the classroom. And a lot of people would say that that's justified, and I could understand that point. We should be able to justify what we're doing in the classroom. But before the hours of paperwork transpired, we were doing a lot of those things. If you weren't doing a lot of those things, it was known, and you weren't there very long. So um, the justification of what we're doing in the classroom is not wrong. Please don't think that I'm against justifying what we're doing in the classroom. It's just from the teaching standpoint, with all the other things we have to do in the classroom, adding hours of uploads and documentation is exhausting. Um, so again, it's justified. It's just exhausting. Um, and then there's just political issues. There's things that get handed down from above, and a lot of it's from um, people that have not been in the classroom, but there's a lot of politics that come into play in the classroom, um, and it takes away from instructional time. It takes away from what we're trying to do in the classroom. It's not something that happens every single day, of course, but there are things um, that take place that, from a political standpoint, we have to just be really aware of what's going on. And again, that's not a bad thing. I don't want to make it sound like we should be completely autonomous in our classroom, and no one needs to know what we're doing in there. But again, it's just one of those things that's added on, um, that just adds to the workload. Um, Now, student discipline, um, that's that's huge. I mean, student apathy is bad, but the discipline issues, once again, after COVID is has just the COVID exacerbated discipline issues in the classroom. Um, Before COVID, there were some, and where I currently teach, again, it's in a rougher part of town, and there's a few more incidences. I've taught all over the metro area of Albuquerque. I've taught in really good schools, schools that kind of would fit like right in the middle of the road, and then again some harder schools. And there is a difference um, with the A schools, the letter grade A, the schools that are high performing. There's not nearly as many issues as the schools that are um, D's and F's, and schools that aren't performing as well as the other schools on the other side of town. But again, um, COVID really brought about discipline issues that none of us educators saw coming. Um, and frankly, it just takes away from instructional time, and it just completely zaps your energy. Um, when you have to break up fights, when you have to break up verbal arguments, when you have to address student bullying in the classroom, in the hallway, in the bathrooms. Um, it's just, it takes that energy. Um, and when it's multiple times a day, um, it's really exhausting. I mean, it really is. Um, when you combine student apathy and you come with student discipline, what you get is a classroom full of kids that kind of just do whatever they want, um, and the administrations at these schools, they feel what we feel in the classroom. Um, because if it's happening in most of our classrooms, think about how many teachers are at a high school. I teach high school, and think about how many teachers these administrators are hearing from besides parents, um, and the other voices that are coming at them regarding student discipline issues. Um, so when you show up to teach and the kids don't really want to be there, or they're just a distraction to teaching, um, and there's substance abuse, and there's um, sexual encounters on campus, and there's boys hanging out in girls' bathrooms, and the destruction of campus, um, and you're trying to play security guard and mediator, amongst all the other hats that a teacher has to wear these days. You leave the school exhausted, mentally, emotionally, physically. Um, and I think lastly, what comes into play, um, when it comes to teacher burnout is the teacher pay. New Mexico is one of the better states, um, but it took a long time to get our pay close enough to where you can kind of feed your family a little bit. Um, it's with inflation and the housing market and all of that. Um, Teachers, we don't really get to go on nice vacations or drive nice cars or live in nice houses unless you're married to someone who makes a decent living, because financially it's not there for teachers. I I grew up pretty well off. My mother was a teacher, but my dad was an engineer, and because he was an engineer at a national laboratory, we were able to enjoy nice things, nice vacations, nice homes. Um, but it was also cheaper. I feel like it was just cheaper to live back then than it is now. So you add the lack of pay, and then also just the other stressors that teachers go through. Teachers have terminal illnesses. My mother-in-law passed away with of cancer. Um, we we have family dynamic issues. We have deaths in the family. We have, just like most people, we have stressors in our life, um, that can affect us, and we have to make sure, as teachers, we have to make sure that when we walk in the school building, we leave the stressors of home, um, at home. We leave them outside the classroom door, um, and some teachers are better at doing that than others. I've lost a child. I've been through a previous marriage. I've had a brother with a got that had a stroke. My dad's had cancer and tumors in his brain, and um, I've I've had stressors in my life that I've had to really kind of just internalize so I can do my job the way it needs to be done. Um, and I've also had students tell me things, and things happen to my students that was really hard to not take home. It really kind of just put a damper on my day, when you hear about what's happening to some of my students at home, um, and what's happening to them in general. It's just really hard to compartmentalize, um, a lot of the time. So, so there you go, right? You have student apathy, with student discipline issues, with not a very high pay, with stressors of life coming into play, and then just the politics of being a teacher, the paperwork. Um, it really adds a lot. And not long ago, I remember teachers kind of got disrespected by a lot of people, and that's changed over the last few years, especially since COVID, because a lot of people know either they are an educator, or they know an educator, or their parents, or they happen to watch the news and they see what teachers have to deal with. And usually, when I mention to someone I'm a teacher, they always thank me, um, and that makes me feel good. I think because a lot of people know they couldn't, they don't want to teach, they couldn't teach, and maybe once upon a time it was considered that they might consider teaching, but with what's going on now, it's it's not for everyone. And again, some schools are harder than others, some schools are rougher than others, and you know, again, I don't have a normal school year if I don't think about quitting at least once or twice. Um, but then we get to May where the kids graduate, and they come to you and thank you for believing in them, and helping them graduate. And you hear these kids' heart, you hear their enthusiasm, and they thank you for what you did, what role you played in them graduating. And there's not a better feeling, um, than knowing you played a part in someone graduating. And like I said, for some of these kids, for a lot of these kids, they're the first ones to graduate in their family. Um, and it just, you can't replace that. Like, it's just, that's what brings me back every school year. So, but it wouldn't be a hard job if I didn't think about quitting multiple times. And statistics show you a lot of people, they're not cut out for it. Um, and being in the classroom for 23 years, and knowing what it's like to teach when cell phones weren't around, um, it was so much easier. Um, and now it's just so different. It's again, I mentioned earlier about wearing different hats. I play teacher, I play coach, I play mentor, I play security guard, um, and there's days where and counselor. You know, I wanted to be a counselor, and then I realized, sadly, there's a stigma attached to counselors, in high school, because no one wants to talk to someone they don't know, or they don't want to confide in a stranger. Even though counselors are there to help our students, there's a stigma attached to that. And I realized as I was working on counseling graduate level classes, I have a greater opportunity to be a counselor when I got a classroom full of kids, and I share a lot of my life and my story with them, and they in turn open up to me. Um, and to be honest, the counseling aspect of my job is by far my favorite. It's also the hardest because I hear things I wish I did not hear. Um, but I also know that for some of those kids, I'm the only one that's ever been there for them. So it's bittersweet. But again, there's been days where I've played all of those roles in a 6 hour day. Um, and then I come home to a wife and a 10-year old and a 2-year old, and I need to have energy for them as well. Even though physically, mentally, and emotionally, um, I'm I'm on fumes. Um, but then the day starts again at 4 in the morning the next day, and I got to be ready for whatever comes at me. Um, so those are I just wanted to talk a little bit about the teacher burnout because it's something that's probably affected every teacher. It's probably affected your child, um, if they are school aged. And it's just a very real thing. And a lot of people don't really know the ins and outs of what our job is. Um, so that's what I wanted to talk about, for this. The next episode is going to be on why teachers choose. I'm sorry, teaching chooses us. Why teaching chooses us. Um, I wanted to own my own business and make a lot of money, and I stumbled a lot upon teaching and subbing, and I want to go more into why a lot of us teachers feel like teaching chooses us, not the other way around. Um, and coming up in a couple days is the last Friday of July, where I am going to have my Friday huddle. Again, that's where things are a little more raw. Things are a little more real. I am going to read an email from a graduating senior at Eagle Valley High School, in the Vail Valley of Colorado, and it's a really disturbing trend. A lot of people have an idea about the suicide increase amongst our young people. But I want to share a letter during that episode, and then I want to share some personal examples of my experiences with that, as a teacher. Um, it's going to be a pretty tough episode to talk about because um, our kids are in crisis mode and they don't know who to turn to or what to do, and a lot of them make a really bad decision. Um, so in a couple days, keep an ear out for my Friday huddle, when I talk about that. Um, so I just want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking time to listen to what I had to say, what I had to share. Once again, I know time is very valuable, and I don't take it for granted that you shared a little bit of your day with me. So, again, this is Andrew Vigil on the podcast Unclassed. Um, when we know better, we do better. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.